first generation freed black person in South Carolina. So she was not born into slavery. Hi. This is apparently also a messy recipe. Hello everyone, welcome back to Mix It Up Black History and the Restoration, where we mix up a recipe while we mix up the restoration by learning about early black members of the church. Finally, I'm back in the kitchen. I've been mixing up nothing, just the restoration, I guess, for the last few weeks. Summer is crazy, but I hope you're enjoying it. It is so hot this year where I live, so hopefully you're all finding a good way to stay cool. I am Taylor Ricks, and today we are going to be talking about Mary Green, and I'm going to make a chicken spaghetti. And a few people have seen me make it, and they look horrified while I'm making it, and then they like how it tastes. So keep that in mind. If you feel scared, don't feel scared. It will come together and it'll be okay. So let's just dive right in. Mary was born in Horry County, South Carolina on August 17, 1868, and her parents were Joseph and Harriet Green. Their last name was originally Vaught, V-A-U-G-H-T, and they, at some point during their marriage, changed their last name to Green. And this shows how they were separating themselves from slavery, because they were former enslaved individuals, and their daughter Mary, who we're speaking about today, was a first generation freed black person in South Carolina. So she was not born into slavery. Hi. This is apparently also a messy recipe. Maybe not if you do it, only if I do it, I guess. So she was not born into slavery, although both of her parents were slaves. In fact, they were married in 1895, I believe it was. 1865. I'm like, that sounds wrong. 1865, which was the very first year that former enslaved people were legally allowed to be married. So they got married as soon as they could. This is a little deviation from the story, but an interesting fact that you may not know is that until the mid-70s, interracial marriage was illegal. So this enslaved people were freed and slavery was banned, and by 1865 they could marry each other, but interracial marriage was illegal in many states until the 70s, when the Loveland case went to the Supreme Court so that they could be the couple wanted to be married and be in an interracial marriage. They had moved out of their home state for a long time and then finally took it to the Supreme Court because they wanted to be able to be legally married everywhere in the United States. They said they weren't doing it for civil rights, they were doing it for their own rights, but it did change the face of the nation. But you want to know what's crazy is that the federal law said it was illegal to ban interracial marriage. However, many states upheld their laws, even though they may not have persecuted people for them. So the state of Alabama had laws prohibiting interracial marriage as late as the year 2000. 2000. So if you think that this may be an old problem, or you wonder why people are still talking about it, or why it is still such an emotionally charged topic, remember, yes, a lot of this happened a long time ago, but not long ago enough. The year 2000. I'm just astonished by that, and so I just thought I would share it with you. Although they were the same race, but race and marriage have been a major part of our nation's history in general. So after they were married, they became sharecroppers, and their daughter Mary worked for them. Now, you can hear the word sharecropper and think, well, that sounds so nice. Like, the word share is in it, so surely it's good. It isn't as nice as it sounds. I need a spoon. Let's just pretend. Anyway, it's not that nice, because what would happen is that after enslaved people were free, quote unquote, no one was left to run the farms, and they weren't given any rights. So they couldn't have jobs, they couldn't own land, they couldn't get married, like so many things. So they started sharecropping, which is essentially they would rent a plot of land from their previous owner, pretty much most of the time, and then they would have to give them a certain percentage of their crops, and that would pay for the land rental, it would pay for their room and board, their food, all of those things. Well, usually by the time they paid back their owner that they were sharing the crop with, a lot of the time they would be in debt. So they would work and work and work and end up being in debt. That to me is just another fancy word for slavery, truly, because they were not owners and masters of themselves if they ended up in debt after a year of work. So it sounds nice, it sounds sherry, but it really isn't. So they worked, basically, they were slaves, they were freed, then they became sharecroppers, and Mary worked for them. At the age of 25, on March 27th, 1894, Mary was baptized, and she was baptized by a man named Don Carlo Loveland from Idaho. And he is from Albion, Idaho, which, if you have never heard of it, it's because it's like the world's smallest town. It is so tiny, like even to this day it's tiny. And my in-laws actually live there. They have a darling house there and just cute. And well, close to there. There's a bunch of little towns, very tiny towns right there, and they all share a gas station and a little corner store. But it's so tiny. And so it had to have been even smaller then. So I kind of loved that connection, that he came from a really tiny town all the way to Horry County, South Carolina, and he taught Mary. And he also baptized her sister Harriet, who was like 15, 16, 17 at the time. The records are terrible. We don't really know how old anybody was. And so he baptized them, and with his companion, who was from a small town in Idaho, so another farming town. And after they were baptized, they became the second and third black members of the church in the area. There were only 3 black members of the church in the area. So I would love to like read Mary's journal or talk to her. I can't wait to talk to her to find out like what drew her to the church and what made her make that decision. It would have been a difficult one, especially when the area talked about the church in a very negative way to begin with. At the time of her baptism, she was married to a man whose last name was Cox, but that's all we know. There's like no marriage record, no divorce record, and she spent her life with her husband named Richard Montgomery. And together they had 3 kids by the name of Luther, Mariah, and Tommy, and they worked as sharecroppers for a long time on the same farm that her parents worked on. By the year 1900, Mary and her husband, as well as her parents, owned their crop of land after working so long as sharecroppers and some of them as slaves. And I think that is so major. Like, you can just read that and like go on along, but to own your own business, you know, be landowners at a time when her parents, Joseph and Harriet, didn't know if they'd ever even be able to get married. They didn't know if their family or children were going to be sold out from under them. They didn't know they could make no decisions for themselves. They had no idea they would ever truly be free. So to go from that to the point where before they died, they were landowners is incredible. I can't imagine what that journey had to have been like for them, to have gone from enslaved to an owner of some kind. Of course, there was still a ridiculous amount of work to do regarding civil rights, and we still see some of the fallout of that. But just the fact, I just feel like they had to have just had so many moments where they're like, couldn't believe it was happening, because they were born into a life that suggested they would never be in charge of anything for themselves. And so, to see that change in one generation is just incredible to me, but also heartbreaking that the change ever had to happen. I think about how my own marriage is an interracial marriage, and in the year 2000 was still technically, though not prosecuted, illegal in the state of Alabama is crazy to me. And so it reminds me we've come so far, yet there's so much to learn and do, which is why I love doing these videos, and I appreciate your willingness to watch them and share them and recommend them to your friends. It means the world to me, even though they are questionable, which just like this recipe was questionable. Yeah, that's frozen chicken. Yes, that was dried noodles. You cook it until the chicken comes to like the 165, unless you're nervous like me, 169 internal temperature, and it's perfect. The noodles are perfect, everything's perfect. You can use whatever tomato sauce you like, and it's just easy. So, that being said, Mary Green died at the age of 65 of a stomach tumor. She had been a widow anywhere from 13 to 20 years because her husband Richard's death was not written down. In fact, her own birthday was not written down well. So we're going off of what she said she was at her baptism, but honestly, there are records that have her birthday in 3 different years. So another reminder of the racial divide that was going on as far as record keeping is concerned. So she was a widow all that time. She did not remarry for a 3rd time, and she lived in that same Horry County, South Carolina, her full 65 years of life. That is the story of Mary Green. Thank you so much for coming to this week of Mix It Up, Black History and the Restoration. I'm Taylor Ricks, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.